When the German Afrika Korps captured their first intact American M4 Sherman tanks in the deserts of North Africa in 1943, they immediately shipped them back to proving grounds in Germany for a mechanical autopsy. The engineers of the Third Reich approached the Sherman with a heavy dose of arrogance. Raised in a culture that worshipped complex, bespoke, clockwork-like engineering, they fully expected the American tank to be a crude, disposable piece of farm machinery. They assumed that because America was building these tanks by the tens of thousands, the internal mechanics had to be sloppy, cheap, and primitive. But as German mechanics began to unbolt the armor and strip the Sherman down to its bare components, their arrogance rapidly turned to profound confusion, and eventually, intense envy. The Sherman tank was not crude. In fact, in terms of industrial design, it was leaps and bounds ahead of anything the Third Reich was producing. The German mechanics simply couldn't understand how the Americans had achieved a paradox. A machine that was mass-produced at a terrifying scale, yet possessed internal machining tolerances so precise that it completely eliminated the need for specialized hand-fitting. The Sherman didn't just outnumber German tanks. On a purely mechanical level, it completely outsmarted them. To truly grasp the genius of the Sherman, you have to look at the absolute nightmare of German tank maintenance. By 1944, the German Panther and Tiger tanks were suffering catastrophic mechanical failure rates, particularly in their final drives and transmissions. When a Panther tank blew a transmission, the tank was effectively dead. German engineering philosophy dictated that the armor shell should be a solid, uninterrupted fortress. Therefore, the transmission was buried deep inside the front of the hull, underneath the driver's compartment. To fix it, German mechanics could not simply open a hatch. They had to disconnect the gun, unbolt the turret ring, bring in a massive, specialized heavy-lift crane, literally lift the multi-ton turret completely off the tank, and hoist the broken transmission out through the roof. If this happened near the front lines where cranes weren't available, the crew had no choice but to pack the tank with explosives and destroy their own vehicle. Now, imagine the shock of a German mechanic examining the front of the M4 Sherman. The Americans had solved the transmission problem with brutal, brilliant simplicity. The entire front lower hull of the Sherman, the heavy steel casing protecting the transmission, was not welded shut. It was bolted on. If an American tank blew its transmission, a field mechanic didn't need a heavy gantry crane or a rail yard. He just took a wrench, unbolted the front armor casing, slid the broken final drive straight out the front of the tank, and slid a brand new factory-sealed unit right back in. What took German engineers 3 days in a specialized depot, American teenagers were doing in 4 hours in a muddy French field. The next feature that completely baffled the Germans was the concept of absolute modular interchangeability. In German factories, tanks were essentially handcrafted by master artisans. Because they were constantly tweaking the designs, parts were rarely uniform. If you took the starter motor out of one German Panther, it might not fit into a Panther built 3 months later. Mechanics frequently had to use metal files to manually shave down gears and pins to make replacement parts fit. The Americans, leveraging the genius of the Detroit automotive industry, utilized absolute standardization. A transmission gear milled in a Chrysler plant in Michigan would perfectly, flawlessly fit into a differential assembled by Ford or Fisher Body. There was zero hand filing required. To the Germans, mass production meant low quality, but they failed to realize that the American machine tools used to build the Sherman were actually more precise than German hand tools. The Americans didn't rely on the skill of the mechanic in the field. They built the precision directly into the factory machines. This meant an American supply sergeant didn't need to worry about specific model numbers or hand-fitting parts. A Sherman water pump was a Sherman water pump, and it would drop into place with a satisfying, perfect click every single time. Nothing confused German intelligence quite like opening the engine bay of the Sherman tank. Over the course of the war, the United States powered the Sherman with an incredibly bizarre variety of engines depending on what the factories could produce. Some Shermans had massive right radial engines originally designed for airplanes. Some had twin diesel engines. The most baffling to the Germans was the Chrysler A57 multibank, which was literally 5 standard automobile engines geared together around a single drive shaft. To a German engineer, looking at a tank powered by 5 bolted-together car engines seemed like absolute madness. It looked chaotic. But then they realized the hidden brilliance. It didn't matter what engine was inside the tank, because the interface was completely standardized. Whether it was a radial aircraft engine or a Ford V8, the mounting brackets, the drive shaft connection, and the fuel lines all met at the exact same standardized points in the engine bay. The U.S. had decoupled the engine from the chassis. If the aviation industry had a shortage, the tank factories didn't stop. They just swapped to the Ford engine and kept the assembly lines rolling. Germany, constantly bottlenecked by trying to produce single, over-engineered Maybach V12 engines, couldn't comprehend this level of modular supply chain flexibility. Finally, there was a quiet, unassuming technological leap that the Germans couldn't replicate: synthetic rubber. By the late stages of the war, Germany was completely starved of natural rubber. As a result, German tanks like the late-model Tiger and Panther had to use steel-rimmed road wheels. These steel-on-steel tracks were a disaster. They caused massive vibration, which rattled the internal electronics to pieces, exhausted the crew, and frequently shattered the tank's own suspension through sheer mechanical shock. The United States, having lost access to Asian rubber plantations, simply invented a massive synthetic rubber industry overnight. Every American Sherman rolled on vulcanized rubber road wheels and utilized track links backed with heavy rubber blocks. This meant the Sherman was incredibly smooth, preserving the life of its transmission and electronics. It was also remarkably quiet. German infantrymen repeatedly reported their terror at how American Sherman tanks could sneak up on them in ruined cities, their rubber tracks muffling the sound of the steel on the pavement until it was too late. When German mechanics couldn't understand the Sherman, what they were really failing to understand was the definition of engineering superiority. German engineers believed that superiority meant having the thickest armor, the biggest gun, and the most complex, clockwork-like suspension system imaginable. They built incredibly lethal museum pieces that broke down if they drove more than 50 miles. American engineers believed that a tank is only a weapon if it actually works. They defined engineering superiority as modularity, repairability, exact machining tolerances, and the ability to manufacture identical parts by the millions. The Sherman wasn't designed to win a one-on-one jousting match in a sterile testing facility. It was designed to be driven thousands of miles across a ravaged continent, repaired in the dark by a 19-year-old with basic tools, and ready to fight again the next morning. The Germans couldn't understand the Sherman because they were looking for a masterpiece of tactical lethality, and instead, they found a masterpiece of industrial survival.